Hi, Nora.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
Doing okay. I'm actually increasing the volume of my microphone, so I may be coming through a little louder now. But I'm doing fine. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright, publisher of the Nonzero newsletter. This is the Nonzero podcast. You're Nora Belrose, an AI researcher. More specifically, you're head of interpretability at EleutherAI, Eleuther. Head of interpretability means you try to figure out what's going on inside these machines, and how we could change that if we want to, like how they represent concepts, and how we might change their, temperament, attitude, behavior, whatever we want to do. In other words, this is part of alignment research, as they say. Um, and I'm really glad to be talking to you. We had a conversation about a year ago or so on this podcast, and a ton has happened since then. In fact, a ton has happened in the last 5 minutes. I mean, the field, it seems like things are moving really fast, and that's one reason I wanted to talk to you.
Right.
The about various aspects of this. I mean, first I want to talk about how fast things are moving, but then talk about your take on the social impact. You're not like a doomer, I recall from last time. Good, we could use some hope. And also talk about like what is behind some of the breakthroughs we've seen or some of the advances. And also what, if anything, do some of these things tell us about the human mind, or what is your view on to what extent what's going on in these machines is like the human mind? We covered that a little last time. Um, but first, I guess the opening question has to be, is the singularity near?
Um, I think if I had to give like a one word answer, I would say yes. I do
Whoa,
think,
okay. In
I
that
do
case,
think,
I'm gonna have to back up and tell people what singularity. I mean, I guess everyone in your neck of the woods in Berkeley, God knows what singularity is. What would you, if you're talking to somebody like at a party who's from some other planet and says, "What is the singularity?"
right.
What would you say before you tell us why it's near?
Yeah. So to be clear, personally, I don't really like to use the word singularity because it is like kind of nebulous, and there are just different definitions that people have
Hmm.
used, and so I think it's, but um, I mean, like I think one definition that, well, so a popular definition that Ray Kurzweil put forward decades ago now. Ray Kurzweil is kind of a technologist who's made a bunch of predictions about the future. And he says the singularity will happen in 2045. And what that means for him, I believe, is something like um, basically the vast majority of the kind of like intelligence or like computation or thinking that will be happening on planet Earth will be happening inside of machines rather than in human brains.
Mm.
Um, but interestingly, in Kurzweil's case, he says that singularity is in 2045. Um, but he actually says that artificial general intelligence, AGI, that will happen earlier. I think it's 2029 is his prediction.
Mm.
Whereas I think some other people might say, well, no, the singularity just is when we reach AGI, whatever they mean by that. So there's different definitions, but
Right. And we should say he had this famous book called "The Singularity is Near." That's what my question was a reference to. And I think if 2029 was his number for AGI, that was quite a while ago. The book came out, I think, a couple
mhm,
decades ago. Maybe not quite, maybe more like 15 years. But so yeah, and one way it's sometimes described, I gather that the term goes back to goes the term goes way back, even in the way this application does, but it's famously associated with the science fiction writer Werner Venja.
yeah,
And in that version of it, um, a key thing is the rate of technological change, which accelerates, which Kurzweil gets into for sure. And the idea is that it starts accelerating especially fast once the intelligent machines get smart enough to improve themselves, and then you're on this kind of slope. And one reason that some people, as you said, would say that once you're at artificial general intelligence, again, whatever that is, you're almost kind of at the singularity and almost at so-called superintelligence, is because at that point they see this kind of feedback loop kicking
Yeah.
in. And I want to ask you a question about that. Like, isn't a version of the feedback loop already kicking in your very office, in the sense that you're an
Yeah.
AI researcher? You make, and I just looked at this site. You're incredibly prolific. This site, it's ARXIV
Archive.
dot. Yeah, that's where all the
Yeah.
AI
Archive.
papers get posted. Do you realize you posted like 10 papers in the last 3 months? I mean, and you never, you always have only one or two co-authors. Are you aware of this, that you're publishing a lot? You probably are.
Yeah, well, just recently in the past like month or so, we kind of dropped a bunch of papers that we're kind of
Okay.
working on for a while, but yeah.
Anyway, I was impressed. But the question is,
Thanks.
so one thing that's happened with these LLMs is that they are helping people who write computer code write it faster, writing a lot of it
Right.
for them, and that power is growing apparently by the month. And so it's already accelerated your work, right? So AI has accelerated AI research in your very office, right?
Yeah, so I think that that's definitely true. I think like it kind of started out with this thing called GitHub Copilot, which is just it's an AI based autocomplete tool that you can use in your coding software, and that can speed up the speed with which you can write code, but it's very simple. And then with like Chat GPT and the kind of these newer LLMs, they're able to write like larger chunks of code. Like you can just kind of give it a couple lines of English describing what you want, and it'll write like 100 lines of Python or whatever. And yeah, they've just been getting better and better at that. And you know, I mean, I still write a lot of code myself, but more and more it's like I'll start out by just like asking a language model to just like kind of make a first draft, and then I see like, oh, does this work? Is there a bug in it, or like is there something obviously wrong with it?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's definitely more of like a collaborative. It's kind of an AI human collaboration now, and that
Mm-hmm.
has sped things up.
And so
Um,
when you said, yes, the singularity is near, what did you have in mind?
right. So I think that I guess the reason why I said yes is because I think no matter which of these definitions you choose, whether it's like AGI or the point at which, a million times more thinking is being done by AI than by humans or whatever, I think all of these things are going to happen, within the next couple decades, like at most.
Mm-hmm.
I think people should really start thinking about, especially if you're like, my age, 30, 40, 50, whatever, like you're probably going to see a lot of this, in your lifetime. And we should start taking that seriously.
Well, I was told that super intelligence was going to bring us immortality. So I was going to be here in a few decades too. Maybe I was misinformed, but I'm hoping to be
Yeah.
with you, like celebrating in utopia after that.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that like life extension is likely to happen as well. Although, yeah, it might take a little longer than we'd like.
Please,
But
I can't
um,
take any more bad news. It's been a tough week.
but
Don't tell me it's not. Don't
yeah,
tell me that I just want to live until life expectancy is growing at a rate of faster than 1 year per year, and then I
yeah,
think I'm safe. The way I'm doing the math, right?
yeah. That's called the Methuselarity or the longevity
That's what
escape
I'm looking
velocity.
for. Is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Methuselarity? Yes.
yeah.
Well said.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, now there's a feeling among a lot of AI researchers. I mean, you mentioned like a decade or two that AGI, as various people define it. Maybe we can get into that a little. I mean, the OpenAI definition is apparently when we get to the point where kind of almost all desk jobs or a large majority of desk jobs can be done by an AI. I think that's close to their
Mhm.
working definition. Other people have other definitions. That's not a bad one because that would be pretty transformative socially,
Yeah.
and possibly destabilizing in terms of employment and stuff. But there's a lot of talk about AGI being 1 year or 2 years away. Now, of course, some of the people doing the talking have an interest in hyping like their particular companies. I certainly
Mhm.
won't mention any names, but I'm sure you've heard, right? Like you're picking up a vibe of something just around the corner, probably in your circles, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess concretely, like I do, like on a personal level, I am like a little bit uncertain about like what my job will look like in 2 years, or like how, to what extent I will be needed. I think I still probably will be needed, but I'm starting to like doubt that a bit because I think,
Whoa.
because like already, my job is kind of a collaboration between myself and AIs, and I think that's just going, the AI portion of it is just going to kind of get bigger and bigger, right? Um, so yeah, I don't know. I guess I would say that like by 2030, I feel like probably my job will look very different and might not really exist. Um, so that's, if I had to guess,
Whoa.
yeah.
So flesh that out a little. So I would have thought, you have to come up with some pretty high level questions. Um, and then yeah, you do the programming and the
Mhm.
AI can do some of that, maybe all of that, but still right now you're framing the questions. I
Mhm.
mean, maybe we should tell people like, you do research again, you actually let me just glance at one or two of your papers on if I can well I guess I've lost the archive page, but you look at like how our concepts represented in these machines. You do experiments to and you come up with whole new ideas like your team. So one of the main tools of interpretability has been something called a sparse auto encoder, right? And we don't
Okay.
need to get into what that is, but your team pretty recently introduced a whole new tool called skip transcoders. And you're
Mhm.
arguing that they are a better tool for
Yeah.
figuring out what's going on inside these machines, what the dynamics of thought are. And I would think like that's not an idea that a machine, is going to come up
Yeah.
with or design the test for, right? There is this level of creativity. I mean, anytime soon, right?
Yeah, I mean, right. So I'm still, kind of uncertain about this. I think that there is part of me that's like, well, I don't know, like so far, we haven't really seen like, large language models coming up with like kind of new scientific ideas, or anything like that. And maybe that will continue. Um, but I'm just not that sure. I'm like, well, look,
Hmm.
if you look, you might have, okay, like if the thing that the LLMs are lacking is creativity, I mean, just a few years ago, you might have thought, well, like, AI can't create art because that involves like creativity and whatever. But now, like AI art is really good, and in some ways, it's like almost more creative than humans, or at least like the median human. Um, and so, yeah, I'm a little bit unsure, like what exactly is missing from current LLMs to like make them more kind of scientifically creative. But I guess I don't want to be very confident that like um there's like a special sauce that
Yeah.
humans have that we're like not, that where it's going to take like decades for us to figure out how to do it. Um, it may just be, yeah.
Are there specific advances lately, either on the research side or in terms of actual products that are available and have been
Mhm.
unveiled that have really that have worried you in this sense, or at least, made you think twice that where you really had to reevaluate and start wondering how long there would be a place for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that So I think my like timelines are a bit shorter than they were when you interviewed me a year ago, and like not just because a year has passed. Um, and
They're not
I
not just
think,
those minus 1 year. Okay.
yeah. And I think it's, yeah, I guess a lot of it is like just the reasoning models that have been coming out. Both like,
Mhm.
first it was like ChatGPT o1, and then like DeepSeek R1 is like a open source version of that from China. And actually, just like a few hours ago, Grok 3 came out from XAI, which seems to be like quite
That
good.
that's
Um,
Elon's model, and he said shortly before unveiling it, it would be I think the smartest brain in the world or something. Is there a reasoning version of that? I mean, it does seem to have gotten good. I mean,
yeah.
it's early days. It hasn't been thoroughly put through its paces, but it has gotten good reviews, and it does seem to belong at the frontier with
Mhm.
the, generally speaking, and it's an open source model, or strictly speaking, open weights model, which we should say is the kind of thing you work on. In fact,
Yeah.
Eleuther, where you work, is something of an open source advocate. Um,
Yeah.
but my question is: there a reasoning version of Grok 3 now that does this chain of thought reasoning?
Yeah, so it does have a reasoning version. I actually like just before this interview, I was like, oh, I should like read up about Grok 3, and I like looked at like a kind of a, so yeah, there is a reasoning version of it. You said it's open weight. I'm not sure of that.
Oh,
I
maybe
know
not. I mean,
I
his
know
models have been, the
yeah,
Groks have been, but you're right. It's
yeah.
it's possible he's not going to do that this time. I don't know.
Yeah, because yeah, maybe it is. I would have to double check that. I know in the past, like they released like Grok 1 or something, and then like later they open sourced it. They might open source Grok 3, but I'm not sure. So I
Okay.
just want to put that out there. Um, full disclosure, I would love it if they open sourced Grok 3. I'm pretty pro open source, but yeah. Um, so yeah, just these reasoning models are pretty impressive to me, and it seems like it does seem like we're moving in kind of a somewhat new direction. Whereas before, the name of the game was just making models bigger, so they have more weights, more parameters, more connection, like kind of brain connections, and
Hmm.
throwing more data at them. Um, Now it seems like that approach has kind of plateaued a bit, but now we're finding that we can like make these models smarter by um, teaching them to reason. And the way that we're doing that primarily is through reinforcement learning, which is effectively like fancy trial and error. So, you'll give like the DeepSeek R1 model, for example, they actually detailed, like, explained in great detail, like how they trained it. And basically, they had a data set of like um, reasoning problems, like math problems, coding problems, things like that, that had a like known correct answer, or like
Hmm.
there's a way to kind of evaluate an answer to see if it's correct. Um, but they didn't give the model like the whole kind of reasoning process that you need to like get to that answer. And they just kind of asked it to like try a bunch of different reasoning, like change of thought, basically. And when a chain of thought ends up producing a correct answer, they kind of give it give it
The
reward, or kind of like reinforce
positive
that type of
reinforcement.
they reinforce that type of thinking.
Hmm.
And when the chain of thought produces an incorrect answer, they kind of negatively reinforce that type of thinking. Um,
Yeah.
anyway,
And so the idea had been previous for a while. Yeah, I had read that the way they do these chain of thought models, and I want to get you to explain more about what those are, but the new reasoning models, which have only been out since September, and this is like a whole new dimension that, as you said, could compensate for any diminishing returns in terms of, the scaling of the training process, in the sense of training on the internet. That, for the they may, that may not work as powerfully as it had to just keep adding more computing power and more text, but apparently, just in the nick of time, there's this whole new dimension of advance, reasoning,
Mhm.
and scaling laws may apply there. And so there may be a lot of progress yet to come. And as you said, at first they were saying, well, it's kind of complicated to train these things. You go in and reinforce each step in the so-called chain of thought. But
Mhm.
yeah, these deep seek people said, oh, just skip that and just, it'll build the right chains of thought if you just reinforce it for the bottom line, the answer.
Yeah.
And that's just one of many advances lately that suggest that things may move faster than we had thought. And now I forget
Mhm.
what I interrupted you saying, but go ahead and say anything
Oh,
else you want about the chain of thought
um,
models, or in general, what has really gotten your attention lately.
yeah, I mean, I guess the reasoning models are the kind of big advance that's caught my eye and many other people's attention. I guess maybe it might just be helpful to mention that if your audience is familiar at all with like AlphaGo or like the kind of Go playing and chess playing AIs,
Hmm.
the way that DeepSeek R1 is kind of fine tuned to do reasoning is sort of similar to that because both of those use reinforcement learning. But in the case of playing Go or playing chess, um, the way it's usually done is you just kind of take a blank slate model. You don't like retrain it at all. You don't give it any kind of like um, examples of play to start out with. You just
Hmm.
start out by like, it, at first it'll just kind of randomly make moves and it'll be terrible. But then you like reinforce the moves that like end up leading to winning a game or whatever. Um, Whereas with DeepSeek R1 and some of these other reasoning models, it really is important to um, kind of initialize them or warm start the training process by training them on the internet, and then after you do that, you can do this reinforcement learning thing. Um,
Yeah. And of course, I guess the latest OpenAI, product that got a lot of attention is taking a reasoning model and connecting it to internet search. This is the so-called deep research thing. And so it uses the reasoning to guide the search. You give it like a research task or something, and apparently it does a very good job of going out, gathering the relevant data, and doing good, not just summary and synthesis, but analysis. Um, and a lot of people are talking about how impressive that thing is.
mhm.
I haven't
Yeah,
used it yet. It costs $200 a month for the time being. But
yeah. I'm also too cheap to pay OpenAI $200 a month. I have heard that there are open source kind of replications of that, which I've been meaning to try, but I've not actually tried them.
yeah, I think somebody, either DeepSeek itself or somebody else, hooked DeepSeek up to web search, and this scares some people. I also had on my podcast a little more than a year ago, Connor Leahy, who was instrumental in the creation of Eleuther, and is much less optimistic than you, and very much worries about what happens when you unleash these things on the internet. Uh, Especially when they're not just gathering information and doing research, although there may be perils there, but when they're really kind of being proactive and doing stuff. Um, so can we talk a little more about this chain of thought? It's a fascinating um, thing. I want to read a tweet of yours about. Let's see the. Okay, so R1 had the was a reasoning model that showed you a kind of version of the chain of thought. I mean, to give people an idea, like Google has a thinking model now. I don't think it's considered to be as good as some of the others, but it has a reasoning model, does this chain of thought thing.
Mhm.
And the whole chain of thought thing, I think, you know, in some ways goes back to a paper published by some Google researchers who noted that if you encouraged an LLM to think step by step and kind of explain what you meant, it would do a better job. So I asked right before I you and I started talking. I went to the the thinking, Google's 2.0 Flash thinking experimental, and said, should we be worried about the pace of technological change? That was my question. And then it shows you these steps, shows you its thinking. It's kind of like talking to itself. The first one is acknowledge the nuance. The question isn't a simple yes or no. Immediately think it's complicated or there are different perspectives. And then it says identify key dimensions of pace. What does pace mean in this context? Blah, blah, blah. And then it gets down to brainstorm potential positive and negative impacts. Now, to be honest, most of the things I saw there seemed to me like things that were probably already built into the system prompts of these machines. It's like, seems like it was always acknowledging nuance and uncertainty and everything. But anyway, the point is, chain of thought, it spells out this internal reasoning process, which is kind of a new feature. And you tweeted that the fact that DeepSeek R1 was showing its chain of thought had forced OpenAI to start showing users, quote, something closer to the true chain of thought, as you put it, but it's still not the raw chain of thought. There should be an option to see the original. And that just kind of plays into my confusion about what's going on with this chain of thoughts. Like, what do we ever really see the raw original? I mean, do we have we do have access to something you can think of as the base level of the thinking?
Yeah. So with a model like DeepSeek R1, and I'm sure there's other open source models like this. With DeepSeek R1, you actually see the real chain of thought, and the real chain of thought is just usually English text. Actually, interestingly, with R1, sometimes it'll switch languages into like Chinese or something. But like usually, if you ask it a question in English, its thinking will be in English. And it's like exactly how it works with R1 is like it has. So all these models have a vocabulary. Usually, it's like 50 to 100,000 tokens, and those tokens are either words or parts of words. But in R1's vocabulary, there's like a special token for thinking. There's like a start thinking and an end thinking token. And so, when you give R1 a query, it'll maybe you can override this. I haven't played with it in depth, but usually it'll start by emitting a start thought token, and then it'll start thinking to itself, and then there'll be like an end thought token. And then after it does its thinking process, now like when it kind of gives you the actual answer, it's looking back to what it thought before, and it's kind of using those thoughts to inform what it will actually tell you, what its answer will be. Now, and that's, I mean, as far as we can tell, that's basically what's going on with like O1, O3 Mini. Those are the OpenAI reasoning models, as well as like Gemini, Flash. They all work roughly like this, where there's going to be like some start thinking and stop thinking tokens, and there's just like English in the middle. The thing is that with I can speak most confidently about OpenAI's models. I'm actually not quite sure what's going on with Gemini. I'd have to look into it a bit more. But with OpenAI's models, there's like a true chain of thought that OpenAI has access to, and that's the chain of thought that's like actually kind of like causally influencing what its answer is. But OpenAI wants to keep that hidden from you. And the main reason they want to keep it hidden from you is that they are worried about people kind of scraping these chains of thought and then training new models on top of that chain of thought. It's kind of like their intellectual property. It's kind of a trade secret or whatever. And so what they're doing instead is they're taking the true chain of thought and then they're feeding it through some sort of summarization model that kind of strips away any like trade secrets and makes it a bit shorter. And actually, interestingly, it'll sometimes translate it. Like I often have my like Chat GPT set up in like Spanish or some other language. And like, even if I'm talking to it in English, the like chain of thought will be shown in Spanish because like the summarizer model is like also translating it, interestingly. but anyway,
And as you said, the DeepSeek sometimes goes back and forth from one language to another. A conjecture I had heard is it depends on the efficiency. Like, like German has a word for taking delight in the suffering of others, Schadenfreude, and so that's more efficient. But that just seems to me like sheer conjecture. I don't think we know why. Do we know why they go back and
yeah.
forth? Uh,
I mean, I don't think there's going to be like a simple answer to that. I mean, I think
yeah.
similarly, if um, I'm sure some people in your audience will be, if they're like bilingual or multilingual. I mean, a lot of times
Mm.
when you think to yourself and you're kind of fluent in multiple languages, you might kind of switch back and forth or just kind of use some mixture or whatever. And so I don't think it's that surprising that it uses multiple languages for its chain
Mm.
of thought, given that it's like proficient in many of them.
Does that mean it has been trained on multiple languages if it's doing that?
Well, yeah, I mean, so we definitely know. I'm not sure exactly in how much detail we know, like we're like how much detail we have about the like training data for DeepSeek, but like obviously DeepSeek was also trained on Chinese, like it's a Chinese like company.
Right. Right.
So it's at least English and Chinese, and I'm sure. I think I even tried talking to it in Spanish before. So like it's pretty proficient in like a lot of languages.
Mm.
Um,
So go ahead. You were talking about kind of, I guess, chain of thought generally, how there is this base level, like the true chain of thought that OpenAI
yeah,
is still not showing us.
yeah, it's not like a mystery or whatever. Like there is just like a chain of thought that it output, and OpenAI like doesn't want to share it basically because they don't want to help other people kind of copy their product, which I kind of get, but like um I don't know. I do think there's like an important interpretability value to being able to see the chain of thought. It's just there's kind of a debate in the literature about like, okay, how faithful is the chain of thought to like a model's true reasoning process?
Uh-huh.
And you can kind of go back and forth on that, but I do think that like the chain of thought is like decently faithful. Like, I mean, there's a reason why if the chain of thought was not faithful at all to the model's true reasoning process, then like why would it be useful to even generate a chain of thought in the first place? Like obviously the chain of thought is improving performance. And so like there it is like it does have this like kind of causal power to it. And so yeah, I think it is valuable for the end user to be able to see these chains of thought. And if you have an open source model like R1, you can see it kind of uncensored in its raw form. And if you're using one of these other models, you can't really be sure that you're seeing the real thing.
Yeah. See, I'm kind of surprised to hear that, like, the true, quote unquote, true chain of thought
Yeah.
is expressed in human language for the following reason. Like, so, I mean, I'm not explaining this to you. I'm explaining my understanding of it to other people out there, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But when you think about just like a basic task like token next word prediction,
Yeah.
or even translation from one language to another. So, if you think there are these layers of neurons, and if you think of the information as flowing from top to bottom as if like pushed by gravity or something, what happens is you translate the words, or strictly speaking tokens, into math, very, complicated, thousands of dimensions of, thousands of numbers representing a single word. Um, they flow down through the model, through the many, many, many interconnections among neurons, from layer to layer. And in the training process, as it's learning next token prediction, what's being adjusted is the so-called weights of the connections. In other words, um, how much emphasis or how much significance a neuron is going to attach to the information that came to it from the neuron above it, from a given neuron above it, one of the many. Um, and the point is that, and then at the bottom, it kind of spits out an answer. It could be the translation of an English sentence into French, or it could be the prediction of the next word in text. But the point is, all the way from top to bottom, it's in this mathematical language. And I think that the kind of term for that realm is latent space, kind of, right? Like, so it gets translated from, like phonetic space or strings of letters into latent space. It gets translated so that it can be in latent space, and then it gets transformed, and then it comes out of the bottom and gets translated again into like letters or something. So I've
Right.
always thought of like all the real thinking, quote, as taking place in latent space, right? It's
Mhm.
like it doesn't take place in the form of human language. And so that's why I'm a little surprised that we talk about a chain of reasoning in English as being the true reasoning. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a mix, right? So of course, if you just ask DeepSeek R1 a programming question and it like thinks for a while and then generates some code. I mean, I would say part of what's happening you can kind of account for in terms of the English that it outputs in its chain of thought, but also a lot of it you can't. It kind of depends on like the resolution that you want to use, or like kind of um, like uh, it's similar to like if a human tries to solve a math problem, right? Like, in school when you're doing a math problem, they often ask you to show your work, and so like that's kind of your chain of thought, and you're
Hmm.
if the work that you show is like mostly correct, but you end up getting an incorrect answer, they might give you partial credit or whatever. Um, so that work is showing like part of it's kind of a summary of the reasoning that you did to get to that answer. It's not everything, because like at every step in the work that you did for this math problem, you could ask like, well, what was really going on in their head to like
Hmm.
make them choose to
Right.
do this step rather than some other step. And
Right.
that, and like if you really want to answer that question of like, oh, why did they choose this step rather than some other step, you might have to like, I don't know, do some neuroscience or whatever. You might have to like look
Right.
at their brain or something like that. And similarly here, it's like, well, if you just want like a high level summary of like what the model was thinking, the chain of thought might actually be pretty good, and it might be the best thing that we really have at the moment.
Yeah.
If you want to look at like something lower level, like, well, why did it choose to think this as opposed to that at this juncture? It's like, well, maybe you need to look at its internal like neural activations or something like that. So it's kind of a mix.
Yeah. I guess another way of putting my puzzlement is to ask, so what you're calling the true chain of thought, like what we think DeepSeek released, but in any event, OpenAI isn't releasing. Um, it's in human language. Is that something the machine naturally kind of inevitably produces just to do the chain of thought reasoning? Or are we kind of having to force it to even do that level of articulation?
Yeah, so I think this is a really important question. So I think in the case of DeepSeek R1, my understanding is that there was not really a strong, if any, pressure during training for the model to kind of stick to human understandable language. It kind of just
Hmm.
happened to do that. I mean, like basically,
Right.
there's basically two stages of training. There's the pre-training where the model kind of learns to speak English and all these other languages, and learns a bunch of knowledge. And then there's a like a reinforcement learning phase where they make it better at reasoning. And you might have predicted that like when you do this reinforcement learning stage, it's English, like basically its thoughts will start in English and then they'll like morph into something that's totally incomprehensible to us, right?
Hmm.
Um, so far, it seems like that hasn't really happened. I know some people have expressed worries that, I don't know, if you do enough reinforcement learning, maybe eventually the thoughts do kind of morph into something that we can't really understand. Um, but so far they are kind of sticking to human language. There was another paper uh, maybe a month or two ago that was looking at basically trying to get rid of the human understandable chain of thought and kind of force the model to like only think in latent space.
Mhm.
And I guess they had like some success there, which, personally, as an interpretability researcher and as someone who is, somewhat concerned about, AI alignment and stuff like that. I'm like you said earlier, I'm not as doomy as some other people, but I do think that keeping these models interpretable and aligned is important. I would like to see a future where these models continue to use human interpretable change of thought, for this, at least for the near future. Maybe, um, and I'm a little bit hopeful that because of models like R1, which show you the chain of thought, that this
Mhm.
will kind of create pressure for AI companies to continue showing people the chain of thought. That people will basically get used to being able to read the thoughts of their AIs, and so that
Mhm.
if in the future, an AI company tries to, get rid of the human understandable thoughts because, maybe it's a little bit more efficient if you get rid of that, people won't like that, and they'll want to
Yeah.
stick to the AIs that have readable thoughts. But yeah, it is an important question for the future, like whether these human understandable chains of thought will continue.
This whole thing has made me think of, I mean, the chain of thought models and the fact that they can generate this rendering of what they're thinking has made me think about the relationship between human language and thought.
Yeah,
It's like, you know, you kind of feel like things are happening at two levels. There's definitely some thought going on in your brain uh, that you may not be entirely conscious of, or just kind of amorphously conscious of, or something. And then you
hmm,
can articulate it, but there's also like a feedback mechanism. There's something about trying to articulate it that can then
right,
clarify the underlying thinking.
yeah,
And I mean, you when you sit down to write something, you realize how confused you are. Like you actually don't understand the
yeah.
thing. And I don't know. Do you think there's any connection between what these things do? I mean, are they telling us anything, or might they tell us something about the relationship in human thinking between language and also, I mean, sometimes like as you think, like words, phrases will kind of pop into your mind, but that's not the whole thinking process. So anyway, uh,
Right.
what do you think about this?
Yeah, well, it reminds me of a book by Agnes Callard that just came out, Open Socrates. I don't know if
Oh, I
you've
had
heard of
her. I
her
had her
or.
on the podcast long ago. A philosopher, right?
Yeah, yeah, she's
Mhm.
a philosopher. And it's just kind of a book about Socrates's philosophy and stuff. But one of the points she makes is that the Socratic method is really about dialogue, and basically she argues that we can
Mhm.
kind of think, we can like come up with new ideas by like dialoguing with someone else that we just couldn't come up with by you know thinking on our own. And even when we do think on our own, a lot of that is kind of simulating a conversation, right?
Right. That's right.
You're kind of like imagining, like, oh, because you're doing some. At least most people have the intuition that we think partially in English, and so we're using language to think, and we might also think like, oh, like what would somebody else say to that, like what would my friend say to that or something. So we're kind of like
Right.
simulating conversations. um and yeah, I do think there's like a pretty fundamental property of like thought and language. And so I don't know, it gives me a little bit of hope that um you know for the near future at least, these models will continue to use human language for a lot of their thinking, but we'll
Right.
see.
Right. I mean, it you know, I wonder, is it, well, so to get back to human thinking for a second, and then this does pertain to my next question about these chain of thought things. Like, it seems to me like two other ways to clarify your ideas. As I said, one is just try to write them down, but the other two ways are to either be challenged, to talk to somebody who disagrees, right?
Yeah,
Or just be full of self doubt, which is in a way simulating a conversation with someone who
Yeah.
disagrees. And sometimes that's literally the concern. It's like, oh, I'm going to publish this thing and people are going to attack it. What are they going to say? So you're just simulating the feedback you'd get from someone who disagrees. And some of the
Right.
descriptions I've heard about how these chains of thought work, because like they'll go down one chain of thought and then they won't wind up sticking with that and pursuing it all the way. They'll have kind of doubts about that chain of thought, right? And then they'll
Yeah.
say, no, let's try this path. So is there kind of a self-doubt dynamic almost, I mean, metaphorically speaking, or something
Yeah.
that they're exploiting?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at DeepSeek's chain of thought, a lot it will say like, wait, never mind, like do something else. It does that all the time. Yeah, I think there is kind of a self-doubt dynamic. There's also kind of an idea in the AI alignment literature that goes back, I don't know, at least 5 years. It might be longer than that now. Called debate, where the idea is, well, let's say we have, a superhuman AI or two superhuman AIs, and we're like, we really want to be able to extract like reliable information from them, and we're like maybe a bit worried that they might be kind of misaligned, or we're not sure if they're completely aligned. How do we do that? And the idea is like, well, if you have two AIs, or if you can make two copies of the same AI, and you can have them debate against one another, then like a human judge should hopefully be able to like extract um, reliable information out of that, because like the one instance will be able to like poke holes in the argument of the other
Mm-hmm.
instance, and they'll be able to come to some agreement. And I think that is probably pretty promising direction. But
Yeah. So I also want to, get into the kind of the social implications of all this. Now, as you know, what we generally do with these podcasts is we talk for a while in front of everybody, and then go into a kind of overtime session that is for paid subscribers to the Nonzero newsletter, and people can become one by just going there and subscribing. There's a link in the show notes in podcast apps too. Um, and you have been generous enough to say you'll stick around for some of that. So I want to both talk more about kind of what we think is going on inside these things, but also get back to the question of social impact, the kind of controversy over whether open source. I can see both value to it and peril to it personally, but I'll get into that. But in any event, it seems to me we're almost to the point of no return on that question. I mean, a couple of years ago, there were people saying, well, we shouldn't permit open weight models. Well, I guess it's always been the case that it would take an international treaty to really prevent it, right? And I don't think we're very close to that level of
yeah,
global cooperation. And China's DeepSeek model has demonstrated the point. I mean, uh, nobody in Washington is going to be advocating that we. I don't think that we quit doing open weights models. So, I don't know, maybe they will. But anyway, I want to get into a bunch of this stuff in overtime. But first, I want to give you a chance to say anything you want to say about, where people can find your work, or,
hmm
elaborating on anything you've said or summarizing anything you've said. First of all, you're on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
it's just Nora Belrose. Um,
Okay.
and
Straightforward.
Yeah, and so our website is EleutherAI,
Mhm.
ELEUTHER .ai. And I think it's like in the top right hand corner, there's like an icon for the Discord server, and you can go and join the Discord server. And we do like a lot of our research out in the open, so you can kind of see what we're doing. And
Mhm.
if you want to volunteer and get involved, we accept kind of collaborators from all over. So yeah,
Okay, good. And that's the other thing that DeepSeek did. It wasn't just that it was an open weights model; it was that they were pretty transparent about
yeah,
how they have built it and what the secret sauce was. And American, I think, even so-called open source models like Meta's, I don't think have been. Those researchers haven't been as forthcoming, have they, about what goes into Meta?
yeah. I mean, Meta did put out a kind of a technical report, but I don't. I don't think it was as detailed as DeepSeek. I haven't directly compared them, though.
Okay. So anyway, we'll continue this, certainly including pros and cons of open source at a social level in overtime. Thanks, everybody who stuck with us this far. And now we are heading into overtime.